This conference is timely as it comes at a time when the Saudi leadership has actually tried to convince the rest of the world that it is undergoing a revolution, and this revolution is top-down, coming from the leadership and specifically from the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has embarked on a project to modernize Saudi Arabia economically, socially and religiously. Let me discuss the three aspects of this program and see where we are now. Let me start with the religious reform that he plans. He promised the West, and this came in the Western press when he talked to the Western press, that Saudi Arabia will have a moderate Islam, and in fact it will return to this moderate Islam that it had before 1979. I want to question that and shed light on how this is a historical error, because 1979 was an important year, but it wasn't the year that turns Islam in Saudi Arabia into radicalization. The Saudi state itself was actually constructed as a project of radical Islam from its very, very beginning. In the 1920s and 1930s, the Saudi leadership cooperated with the religious groups at the time in order to create the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but this creation was very much dependent on fighting everybody who professed a different kind of Islam, and therefore radicalization was an integral part of the Saudi project from the very beginning. Also, if Mohammed bin Salman is serious about creating moderate Islam, I wonder why he has actually put so many religious scholars in prison for no reason or an apparent reason so far. If one is serious about creating moderate Islam, it should allow Muslims who are actually knowledgeable about Islam to come and debate in an open forum rather than actually suppress different opinions and put them in prison. The excuse that he put those religious scholars in prison because they were against the social modernization he's going to do. This is not correct, because some of the detained scholars had actually advanced their thinking about social issues, and we can't all claim that they are terrorists. The second reform that he plans to do is the social and gender reform, the reform that deals with the situation of women in Saudi Arabia. And of course, such a project appeals to a Western audience, especially at a time when Mohammed bin Salman is trying to get a vast investment inside Saudi Arabia to compensate for the declining oil prices. So his social reform involves allowing women to get more involved in the economy and have more visibility. However, there are still restrictive laws under which both men and women live in Saudi Arabia, and without changing those laws, it is impossible to see that the right of driving is going to change much in the situation. And the third one is the economic reform that he promises. Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 and the Social Transformation Program are actually ready-made recipes that had been tried and sometimes failed in other countries. They are imported from abroad, and they are the work of management consultancy firms that have no serious knowledge of the social fabric of Saudi society and what is possible and what is not possible. There are certain new elements in this vision, but also there are a lot of old elements that had been promised before. Since the 1970s, every Saudi five-year development plan included programs to diversify the economy, privatize some aspects of state assets, and also Saudization. Since the 1970s, if you look at the statistics, we find the number of economic migrants who have actually moved to Saudi Arabia had increased rather than decreased, which gives me the idea that we should actually doubt this kind of grand project because they have failed to produce the results that they want. And in order to understand why Saudi Arabia, with all its wealth, had failed to produce positive results, improve the situation in the country, increase the employment opportunities for the youth, we need to look at the political situation. The political situation does not encourage any kind of participation of society in the decision-making process. All the projects, the economic transformation projects and the ideas come from the top, and they are handed to society. Society is expected to just comply by these new reforms. There is no debate about them, there is no exchange of ideas, and they are definitely not the ideas of indigenous Saudis. They are imported from abroad, and therefore they tend to not work in the country if we judge the present situation by what we learned from the past. It's true that some of the oil wealth had been used to improve the infrastructure of Saudi Arabia, had generated quite a lot of wealth for Saudis, provided them with health services, with schools, with universities. But at the same time, this so-called development is undermined by the corruption that is rife in the country. And this brings me to talk about the recent move against corruption, what is called the anti-corruption drive that has resulted in the imprisonment of several high-ranking officials and princes. It turned out to be that Mohammed bin Salman really wanted to detain them so that they could release some of their own personal wealth to the government. And this is a bizarre situation, because anti-corruption moves should actually take place in a country where there is an independent judiciary, there is transparency. When dictators pick on several people and accuse them of corruption, we really have to take that with a pinch of salt, because if we do not have an independent judiciary and transparency, we don't know whether this particular detainee is removed for political reasons rather than for anti-corruption reasons. Therefore, it is very difficult to see how Saudi Arabia is going to implement the new sort of revolutionary change without also some upheaval and problems. And finally, I want to concentrate on the issue of Saudi society. We hear quite a lot from Saudi citizens, intellectuals who are very close to power, that we really cannot jump into some kind of political reform, mainly representation or an elected parliament, elected government. This kind of discourse brings me to the fact that some of those intellectuals are actually duplicating what Orientalists say about the Arab world in general, that this Arab world is sectarian, conservative, tribal. If they are given the opportunity, we are going to have that somebody would vote for his cousin or his brother. They will never vote on clear principles and shared interest. But of course, if you ban civil society, if you ban political parties, if you ban association and restrict freedom of speech, you're not going to get a society that actually vote on the basis of shared interest. If everything is prohibited, there is no freedom of speech, it's almost impossible to think that Saudis are going to vote for people other than their cousins or relatives. And therefore, opening up the political sphere requires, first of all, allowing people to have freedom of speech and also allowing freedom of association. Then we could talk about a gradual change and political reform of the serious type. It is impossible to continue the situation and think that, oh, this society is not ready. There is no time when society is ready. Political reform and democratization is a process, and it is a process. It's not an air conditioning that you could bring and import from abroad and just install it in your house and feel cool. Democracy is a process that involves the certain moving forward but also moving backward. It is impossible to think that we could just import it and impose it in Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, in Saudi Arabia today, this process has not started and will never start as long as we have an absolute monarchy that retains all powers in the hands of one man. Thank you for listening.